Grunenfelder. I've been a member of this church for 30-some years. I just want to tell you up front that regardless of where we end up at the end of this process, that I plan to remain remain a member of this congregation. Let's just open up in prayer real quick. Dear Heavenly Father, just help me go through this process with these folks, help them to understand what you would have us to do, Lord. Just guide us each step of the way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Let's see if this thing's working. I'm hitting the slide 2. There we go. Okay. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. A little bit more background here. Like most of you, I had no idea there was issues going on with the church. Not until last spring, we had some classes that Brad oversaw, basically telling us what was going on in the United Methodist Church. My first thought was, why would I want to leave? Why would anybody want to leave? I'm happy the way things are, okay? So if there's a change out there, why are not the people who are wanting the change, why aren't they leaving and starting their new church? So that was my initial thoughts on the process. As things got a little bit more dug deeper, our church council decided that they would start to dig deeper into this process. It became obvious that things weren't going to stay the same, so that option to stay and not have anything happen seems kind of unlikely. So the church council decided to start the discernment process. The discernment process is laid out by the United Methodist Church, and it's for making big decisions. So discernment basically means that we're going to think about the process, look at all the pros and cons before we come to a decision. Just to let you know, nothing is going to happen tonight. We're just here sharing information. So the discernment committee, or the church council, go with the slide that says who's on the committee. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong here. It's not. There you go. Okay, so it's myself, Rob Grunenfelder, Alan Cleveland, Delane Dacus, Linda Gallion, Don Lehman, Jim Morris, and Jenny Seiler. I feel that the church council picked a fairly diverse group of folks here. None of us are here to push an agenda either way. In fact, that's part of the process, is that we are just a guide. This is probably 20-some pages that the UMC puts out on disaffiliation, which is something we are thinking about doing. Discernment is the process of considering that. And there's 15, 20 pages on how to do that. So there's a lot of guidelines on this process. So our committee started meeting pretty much every week since the first part of December. We've gone on some field trips. We've been down to a church in Cleveland who's gone through this process to see how they did it and what the results were. Several people went to a global Methodist meeting, which is a church that has kind of spawned off as this, I guess this controversy started in the church. So after, looking at a lot of the information, there's a lot of videos, a lot of articles out there, and we would like to first show you a video that we think is pretty even keel, is very factual. Are we ready to start that video? It's about 9 or 10 minutes.
Over 2,300 congregations have left the United Methodist Church since the last General Conference, and the number is rising. For comparison, the whole denomination of the Evangelical Free Church in America has only 1,300 churches, and the Conservative Presbyterian denomination, the Presbyterian Church in America, has 1,911. This is a massive exodus from the largest mainline Protestant denomination in the USA. Let's quickly review how we got here. In February 2019 was the UMC's yearly General Conference, and a vote was taken on whether to keep certain words in their Book of Discipline, particularly this part: the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Therefore, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. Different plans were made on how to deal with this wording and also how to deal with a potential breakup in the church, seeing that everyone knew that this would be a contentious issue. Those who wanted to keep the wording voted for what was called the traditional plan, and in the end, this plan passed with 53 to 47% support. The UMC is a worldwide denomination with about half the membership outside of the U.S., and it was those votes that led to this plan passing, since polling has shown that the majority of U.S. United Methodists don't view homosexuality in that way. Nonetheless, there are many traditionalist American United Methodists, both in the pews and also in the pulpits. And they won, right? Well, reality is that the traditionalists are leaving the UMC in droves because although the Book of Discipline has not been changed, there are still many UMC churches that are promoting full LGBT acceptance, and ministers that are in gay relationships are not being disciplined by their regional conferences. In fact, all the way back in 2016, Karen Oliveto, in an openly lesbian relationship, was elected by her conference to be bishop. This led in 2017 to the UMC's High Court saying that she was in violation of the Book of Discipline, but that they would leave any enforcement to the conference, which, seeing as they had elected her in the first place, has done nothing about the matter. Also in 2016, at the General Conference, over 100 UMC clergy and clergy candidates came out as gay. The traditionalists didn't see much of a way forward in the current UMC, so the next plan was for a way to get out smoothly. For a while, this was the Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation, which allowed churches in a set time frame to exit with their property and even receive millions of dollars from the UMC. This plan was created with a hope of being passed with the support of people from across the spectrum of the UMC, but in the years since, support for it has crumbled and it's considered to be basically dead. However, the traditional plan itself contained an exit plan, which is now part of the UMC Book of Discipline. The section on disaffiliation from the UMC begins, because of the current deep conflict within the United Methodist Church around issues of human sexuality, a local church shall have a limited right, under the provisions of this paragraph, to disaffiliate from the denomination for reasons of conscience regarding a change in the requirements and provisions of the Book of Discipline related to the practice of homosexuality or the ordination or marriage of self-avowed practicing homosexuals as resolved and adopted by the 2019 General Conference, or the actions or inactions of its annual conference related to these issues which follow. Following that are several specifics. The ability to exit the UMC under this clause expires on December 31, 2023. A 2/3 majority vote of the members is required. The terms of exit are set by the Board of Trustees of the particular church's annual conference. The church must make payments to fund pensions for retired UMC clergy, and the church is to continue to pay their apportionments to the UMC for 12 months beyond the disaffiliation. In exchange, churches are dismissed from the UMC and get to retain their property. The terms of this exit plan are not as generous as the Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation, so for a while, congregations were considering holding out in the UMC until the next General Conference to hopefully pass the protocol and then decide on exiting the UMC. However, in the over 3 years following the 2019 General Conference, the UMC has pushed off holding its next General Conference due to COVID-19, and now the plan is to hold the next one in 2024. That means by the time such a protocol could be brought to the conference, the traditional plan's built-in exit would expire. If a congregation waits until the next General Conference to procure a path to exit, and no plan is passed then, there's the risk that they could be stuck in the UMC and have to surrender their property if they wanted out. March 3rd of 2022 was when the news came out that the General Conference would be postponed to 2024. On May 1st, the Global Methodist Church was launched. This was the beginning of a new traditionalist denomination, and many of the churches leaving the UMC are joining the GMC. Prominent UMC ministers, along with lawyers, are joining the GMC. Prominent UMC ministers, along with lawyers and influential figures, called for people to exit right away and not wait for a general conference. So churches have been doing just that. On November 13, 2022, 58 churches in the Louisiana Conference departed the UMC. On December 3, 439 Texas churches left. On December 10, 198 churches left the North Alabama Conference. But things have not always come easy. Another requirement to leave the UMC is that a church's annual conference approve the disaffiliation. On November 18, the Arkansas Conference approved the exit of 35 churches, but 3 of the disaffiliations were denied. One of these, First United Methodist Church of Jonesboro, has received particular media attention. Unlike some of the disaffiliating churches, there was significant disagreement in this church about leaving the UMC. A Facebook page called Stay UMC Jonesboro was created where members who disagreed with the congregation's leadership made their voices heard. The church had barely cleared the 66.7% hurdle in their congregational vote, with 69% voting to leave. At the Arkansas Conference's meeting, questions were raised about whether the process leading up to the vote had been fair. The unprecedented act of the conference blocking the disaffiliation means that the church would have to redo the entire disaffiliation process. The church's pastor, John Miles, called a meeting to once again vote on leaving the UMC and to approve new bylaws, and he was warned by UMC leadership that the meeting would be in violation of the UMC's Book of Discipline. Those in opposition to the church leaving the UMC boycotted the meeting, while around 650 members did attend, and the votes to adopt new bylaws and leave the UMC were passed by over 98%. The following day, the bishop suspended Pastor Miles, and the Arkansas Conference claimed the title to all the church's property. A few days later, the church filed a lawsuit against the Arkansas Conference. In defense of this unprecedented situation, the bishop pointed to the fact that only 3 of the 38 congregations seeking to leave were prevented from doing so, that when the disaffiliation was clear-cut, churches were allowed to leave. But recent events in Georgia were not so precise. On December 28, 2022, the Georgia Conference announced that they would no longer approve any disaffiliation requests before the 2024 General Conference, which means that by that time, the ability to disaffiliate under current rules would be expired anyway, essentially trapping the churches in that conference in the UMC, with an unclear future about how they may ever be able to leave and retain their property. In the email announcing the policy, the Georgia Conference stated, "As a result of the misleading, defamatory, and false statements and materials shared with local church members by certain organizations, as well as clergy and lay members of various churches and outside groups, we do not have confidence in the validity of upcoming church conference disaffiliation votes. After lengthy periods of discussion and consultation involving the cabinet, the board of trustees, and appropriate conference leadership, we have agreed that our annual conference cannot rely upon such votes for purposes of negotiating a gracious exit." Traditionalists have seen these actions as signs of bad faith from the more liberal leadership of the UMC in the United States, while the leadership making these actions have decried what they view as misinformation and fear-mongering about the future of the UMC. Another such policy decision that the traditionalists have decried was the December 14 decision by the UMC Judicial Council that there would be no new elections for General Conference 2024. Basically, the council said that the 2024 conference is not actually a 2024 conference, but simply a rescheduled 2020 conference. Since the delegates had been elected back in 2018 and 2019 for that conference, according to the council, it would be disenfranchising those delegates to not let them serve. As a result, though, the original allocation of delegates stays the same. The impacts of this lead to unusual results. For example, the Northwest Texas Conference in December 2022 approved the disaffiliation of 145 of its around 200 congregations. As a result, this conference is 1/4 the size it was before and 3/4 less traditionalist. However, in the next General Conference, it will still be represented with delegates as if it still had 200 congregations. This means that the quarter of remaining congregations will have an outsized influence in the voting. This situation will play out through all conferences where churches disaffiliate. The more traditionalist a conference was, the more the remaining less traditionalist churches will be overrepresented in the General Conference. By these rules, there will likely be an overrepresentation of moderate and liberal voices in the next General Conference, enough perhaps to shift the numbers against the more traditionalist voices coming from places like Africa. Even though over 2,000 churches have left the UMC in the U.S. will still get 55.9% of the delegates as if nothing happened.
You can see there's a lot of information up there. That gentleman talks pretty fast, so you may want to watch that again. This will be archived on the website, so you can watch this whole presentation again. And I urge each of you to do your own digging. Let's see here. So, background information. All right, so let's go to the background information slide. All right, so as you can see, it's been over 50 years since UMC has been debating this, and I think each General Conference, something comes up for a vote, and the vote every conference seems to be a little bit tighter margin. As he stated last time, it was 53% to 47% to remain the same. All this boils down to is arguing over how this book should be followed. This is the book of discipline. It's almost as big as the Bible. But this has not changed yet, but it could, and that's what all this is about. This is a 2016 version, if anybody wants to take a look at that. Also, I think, hopefully all of you read the initial letter that our committee sent out, and we gave some references there. One was the Book of Discipline, which you can look at online. Debate, as he said, continued over the next several years, and it's just been kicked down the road because of COVID. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay. This gracious exit plan. So that's what I guess our church is considering is whether we want to vote. So just to reiterate, this whole process over the next couple of months is for our church to think and pray about what direction we want to go. At the end of this process, our committee will get the temperature of the church and decide whether we even go to a vote. And we'll talk about more of that in just a minute here. Next slide, please. All right, so as it stands right now, a couple weeks ago, 12% of the Holston Conference churches have voted to disaffiliate. Now, they will not be approved until the next council meeting, which is in April, but we won't have our process done at that time. But the bishop has assured us that if we do decide to go that route, they'll hold another meeting this fall. So if we do, then they assure us that they'll hear our voice and consider us if we decide to go that route. Next slide. All right, so the expiration date is driving the process nationwide. They may decide to extend this gracious exit thing, but nobody really knows. And as this gentleman talked about, the types of, the balance of power may be getting closer to 50-50 or possibly even more liberal than traditional. So basically we've already talked about us gathering the facts, reading scripture, deep reflection, prayer. Next slide, please. So it's up to you all to dig a little bit deeper. Don't just rely on what our committee is telling you or what you read in one article. Spend some time looking through these things and making your own decision, how you feel about it. It is a difficult decision or a difficult process, but the church council has decided that it's a necessary one, and so we'd really know where we stand on this issue. Next slide. All right, as I mentioned, we're checking the temperature of the congregation, and we will make a recommendation, and the church council gets the final say-so, but I imagine whatever our committee comes up with, they'll probably follow that recommendation. Next slide, please. All right, so if we do decide to have a vote, all right, and like I said, we're not voting tonight, the district superintendent, the bishop, will set a date to have that vote. Unfortunately, you have to be here to vote. They will check membership at the door. I don't think they'll check IDs, but in order to vote, you have to be a member. Now, if you're not sure if you're a member, after the meeting you can come and check. We have a list here of who's on the rolls. If you're not a member, it's very easy to become a member. You just see Pastor Brad, and there's a simple process to becoming a member. And also, if you want to check the church office if you're not a member. 2/3 majority of those present and voting. That ballot will only have two things on there if we get to that point. The ballot will say we vote to, your personal vote would be to leave the UMC or to stay in the UMC. Those are the two options that would be on a ballot. Again, we're following all the rules and guidelines of this whole process. Next slide. All right, so some important considerations. As most of you know, some of you may not have known, we do not own our own property. In the United Methodist Church, your property goes into a trust, okay? That's been that way for eons, and of course we own this building, and luckily we just paid it off. We also own a parsonage, and we own a little thing called Outpost Mission. Okay, so there's 3 pieces of property that we own, plus I guess some vehicles and other things of that nature. So right now the number they're telling us is $238,314 is our payout to basically pay these forward pensions and different types of fees that we would have to pay in order to leave the church and become our own entity. In that process, I said if we end up voting and we do vote to leave, then we would have to hand a check over to the council or district, whatever you want to call it, in order for us to leave. Now, the Finance Committee has looked at options on that. We could get a loan to pay for that. And there's a lot of other things we'll talk about later on, okay, how would we ever pay for that? There is a way, and we'll talk about that at future meetings. All right, so if we decide to have a vote, if that vote turns out that we want to leave, then the next process would be to, what are we going to do? Are we going to be an independent church? Are we going to join the global church or one of these other churches that are popping up? Wesleyan denominations, there's about 4 or 5 of them already. We cut that video off about 3 minutes short. Apparently there's been 2 other churches that have spawned recently over this issue, so the churches that are leaving have to decide what to do. I can tell you that the church we met with in Cleveland, they've decided to stay independent for a year or 2 before they make their decision. There's a lot of things to consider. One of them is your pastor, so you have to also become a corporation and get a 501c3 if you stay independent for any period of time. Let's go to the next slide here. All right, so those are our 2 choices. We remain UMC and nothing changes at all, and then we wait till the next general conference in 2024, which is supposed to be April, May, over in, I believe, Charlotte. Do I have any other slides there? Okay, so what are we going to be doing? Other than this process that we're doing tonight, our plan is to meet in small groups. We're going to have a person from our committee go to each Sunday school class and some of the Bible studies to help answer questions and spur some conversation and debate. We'll put together some questions that most of us have, and there'll be other questions that everybody else will have. So it's going to be a lengthy process and a lot of stuff to consider. Along with that, after the small group meetings, we plan to have a couple larger meetings such as this. Those will be the times that hopefully everybody has prayed about it, thought about it, studied about it, and then can ask educated and give their opinion one way or the other on what they feel we should do. We'll probably also have some straw polls so that we can get a better feel of which way the church wants to go. I mean, my hopes are that we'll either go, 90% one way or 90% the other way and not have a lot of dissension, but we have no idea of knowing that until we get into this process. Prayer and fasting. If you looked at your newsletter this week that Pam sends out, a preacher talked about fasting, so that's something you may want to consider. So if you're not getting your emails, check with the church office, because moving forward, everybody should have gotten a letter, and I see some faces that I don't normally see here, so obviously people were getting the letters, and we can't send out a letter every week of what's going on. This is a very fluid process, but we will be sending out a lot of emails, and anytime anybody has a question, I want you to ask one of our committee members or myself, and we'll try to guide you in the best way we can. We'll probably put out some information about the other Wesleyan denominations. If you're interested in learning more, some of these videos that are out there, and I will caution you ahead of time, don't just go to one source. There's a group of videos out there put by the Global Church that are very good, but if you just focused on that only, you'd say, we want to be Global Methodist. There's another gentleman out there who has a counterpoint view of everything that the Global Methodist Church puts out. And if you watch that, you say, well, maybe that's what we need to do. Need to look at both sides of this issue and make your own decision. Don't be swayed just by watching a 5-minute video here, 10-minute video here. There's a lot of information to consider. Are we, everything else on the slides? Okay, all right, so thank you for watching at home. Now, if anybody has questions, we'll do a little